The next step in the RFL rebuild is setting the coil height so that we can glue it to the suspension. This is a 3-inch tall voice coil. The winding height is 3 inches. I use my calipers to measure the motor depth from the top of the top plate down to the lowest possible point that the coil can travel to. That depth is 3.263 inches. I measured the top plate thickness to be 0.5865 inches. So then I took the winding height, which is 3 inches. I subtracted the thickness of the top plate and divided that by 2, which gives you X max, which means the amount of the voice coil that extends above and below the top plate when it's in its resting position, and is the maximum distance the voice coil can travel while it is fully contained within the top plate. Anything beyond 1.2 inches and it's no longer inside the top plate. So anyway, the X max is 1.2 inches from the top plate to the top of the winding. So that means I want the voice coil to sit right at this line. In order to measure that, I determined the center of the winding. Then I added half of the top plate thickness above it. Once I got that, I just used my calipers to figure out the height. Locked it and went around and marked it. So I have 3 separate locations on the voice coil to mark the height. The next thing I'm going to do, just to simplify my life, because even though I'm going to be shimming the voice coil so that it is very well centered, the concern becomes that it will slide down into the voice coil. Voice coil gap. So I use a rubber hose clamp, put it on the voice coil and set it to the lines, the 3 lines that I drew, and clamp it. And then that prevents the voice coil from going any further into the voice coil gap. It's a very simple trick. It's very effective, and it prevents any movement of the voice coil beyond the position that I'm trying to set it at. And of course that's to maximize effective motor force. Set it to the top of that, that. Now, I'm going to put too much pressure on it. There you go. Stops the coil from going any further. That way, when I slide the spider assembly over the voice coil itself can't move at all, which will make it a lot easier, because it's basically impossible to check the height that it's at once you cover it. I mean, you can look in through the cooling, but we're not going to go that route. I then, for centering, I use a sheet of, it's like a document cover, plastic, cut to 9 point whatever inches, 4.2, to center the coil, and then it's good to go. Now when you're putting anything on the voice coil, you don't want to be applying any pressure to the voice coil, because then when you take the shim out, the coil will shift towards the motor core and you'll get coil rub, etc. You'll have no adjustment and it will not be ideal. You also want to make sure that your leads are aligned with your terminal screw locations, because you don't want to have to wrap them around the former or anything silly like that. And like I say, there should be no pressure on there when you glue it in place. You do want to screw it just in case putting the screws on shifts it at all. That way it doesn't move when you're gluing it. These guys, what are we gonna do? This one. Feel any significant amount of pressure. Coil is lined up. Now I'm going to crazy glue it or CA glue it to the voice coil. I would